The great hall of the Galactic Academy stretched so high that its ceiling disappeared into artificial clouds. Thousands of students filled the massive space, and not one of them looked like another. Some had scales that shimmered in the light. Others had tentacles instead of arms. A few floated in the air without any visible means of support. In one corner, a group of crystalline beings hummed in harmony, their bodies producing sounds that made the air vibrate. Among all these strange and wonderful creatures, 12 humans sat together in a small cluster. They looked plain in comparison. No scales, no tentacles, no special abilities that anyone could see. Just regular people from a planet called Earth that had joined the Galactic Coalition only 5 years ago. Ji-woo sat in his chair and tried not to stare at the alien students around him. His palms were sweating. Next to him, Hannah kept adjusting her academy uniform, a nervous habit she had developed since arriving at the school 6 months ago. Behind them, Yuna whispered something to Taiyang, who nodded without taking his eyes off the stage at the front of the hall. The headmaster walked onto the stage. Headmaster Vecthar was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species. His skin was a deep purple color, and his 4 eyes could look in different directions at the same time. When he raised his hand, the entire hall fell silent immediately. Students of the Galactic Academy, his voice boomed through the hall without any microphone or speaker. Today we announced the proving trials. Students whispered nervously. The sound rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. Even the most confident students looked worried. The proving trials were famous throughout the galaxy. They were designed to test the absolute limits of young minds. Most students failed. Some failed so badly they had to repeat their entire first year. Ji-woo felt his stomach tighten. He had heard about the proving trials from older students. The stories were not encouraging. Last year, only 7% of first-year students had passed. The year before that, it was 5%. Humans had never even tried them before. Headmaster Vecthar continued speaking. The trials will test your ability to think beyond your training. You will work in teams of your choosing. You will have 72 standard hours to complete the challenge. A hologram appeared above the stage. It showed a complex pattern of lines and symbols that hurt to look at. The pattern twisted and turned in ways that did not make sense. It looked like a map, but not of any place that existed in normal space. This is the Celestial Path problem, the headmaster said. It was created by the ancient builders, a civilization that disappeared 4,000 years ago. The greatest minds in the galaxy have studied this problem for centuries. None have solved it completely. Your task is simple. Find the solution. Simple. Ji-woo thought. Right. Nothing about that hologram looked simple. Next to him, Hana leaned close and whispered, "We are going to fail so hard." Ji-woo could not disagree with her. After the announcement, students rushed to form teams. The Vrin, a species known for having 4-lobed brains that could process information faster than any computer, immediately grouped together. They looked confident, almost smug. The Asari, who could read each other's thoughts, formed their collective without even speaking. The Thrain, whose mathematical abilities were legendary, gathered in a tight circle and began discussing strategy before they even left the hall. The 12 humans met in a quiet corner of the hall. They looked at each other with worried faces. "Okay," Minji said, trying to sound positive. "It cannot be that bad, right?" "It is exactly that bad," Nari replied. "Do you know what the pass rate is for the proving trials?" "Less than 10%. And that is for species that have been in the academy for generations. We are the first humans to even try this." Hyan, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke. "What do we know about the problem?" Everyone turned to look at him. Hyan was the youngest in their group, but he had a way of asking good questions. "Not much," Doyun said. "The ancient builders made it." Nobody has solved it. It is supposed to be impossible. Nothing is impossible, Hyan said quietly. Just very difficult. Soman pulled out her datapad and started searching for information. There are thousands of academic papers written about this problem. Hundreds of theories. But nobody has ever achieved a complete solution. The best attempt got to 97% completion. And that was by a team of Thrain masters who worked on it for 3 years. We have 72 hours, Junho pointed out. Yes. Thank you for that encouraging reminder, Yoonji said. They decided to meet in the human dormitory lab the next morning. As they walked back to their rooms, Jiwoo noticed the other species staring at them. Some looked curious. Others looked amused. A few looked almost pitying, as if they were watching someone walk towards certain failure. That night, Jiwoo could not sleep. He kept thinking about the hologram, the twisting pattern that seemed to defy logic. He pulled up the problem on his personal datapad and stared at it for hours. The more he looked at it, the less sense it made. Around midnight, he heard a knock on his door. It was Taeyang. Cannot sleep either? Taeyang asked. No, Jiwoo admitted. They sat together in the small room, both looking at the problem on their datapads. What do you think the ancient builders were like? Taeyang asked after a long silence. Jiwoo had not thought about that. I do not know. Advanced, obviously. Smart enough to create a problem that nobody can solve. But why would they create it? Taeyang pressed. What was the point? It was a good question. Jiwoo had been so focused on trying to understand the problem itself that he had not stopped to wonder why it existed in the first place. The next morning, all 12 humans gathered in their lab. It was a small space compared to the facilities that other species had, but it was theirs. Someone had brought breakfast, though nobody felt much like eating. Professor Mekton, their faculty advisor, stopped by to check on them. He was a tall insectoid creature with compound eyes and mandibles that clicked when he spoke. I want you to know, he said, that there is no shame in not completing the trials. You are humans. This is your first year. Nobody expects you to succeed. After he left, Hana turned to the others. Did he just say that nobody expects us to succeed? I think that was supposed to be encouraging, Minji said. Well, it was not, Nari replied. They spread out their materials on the tables. Datapads, holographic projectors, reference books from the Academy Library. Yuna pulled up the problem on the main display screen. Okay, she said. Where do we even start? Hyan was staring at the pattern with intense focus. I think we are looking at this wrong, he said slowly. What do you mean? Jiwoo asked. Everyone is trying to solve it like a calculation, like a math problem. But what if it is not? What if it is something else? The others looked at him, waiting for him to continue. What if, Hyan said, it is a story? Nobody knew what to say to that. In another lab, the Vrin were already running millions of calculations per second. The Asiri collective was deep in telepathic analysis. The Thrain were building mathematical models that would have made Earth's greatest scientists weep with envy. But in the small human lab, 12 students from a young species stood around a table and began to wonder if everyone else might be solving the wrong problem entirely. The first thing the humans did surprised everyone, including themselves. While every other team in the academy immediately began working on the problem, running calculations and building complex models, the humans decided to sleep. You want to do what? Minji asked when Do-hyun suggested it. Sleep, Do-hyun repeated. 8 hours. All of us. We only have 72 hours total, Soman protested. We cannot waste a third of our first day sleeping. But Do-hyun was firm. Look at what the other teams are doing. The Vrin are running their brains at maximum capacity. They will not stop for 3 days straight. The Asari are in constant telepathic link. The Thrain are calculating non-stop. They are all using their natural advantages. And our natural advantage is sleeping? Junho asked doubtfully. Our natural advantage is being human, Do-hyun said. And humans need rest to think clearly. Our brains work differently when we sleep. We process information, make connections, solve problems in our dreams. It is how we evolved. They argued about it for another hour, but eventually everyone agreed to try Do-hyun's approach. They set alarms for 8 hours and went to their rooms. Ji-woo did not think he would be able to sleep. His mind was too full of the problem, of the pressure, of the fear of failure. But the moment his head hit the pillow, exhaustion took over. He fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When he woke, he felt different, clearer. His mind was not racing anymore. He could think. They all met back in the lab, looking surprisingly refreshed. Outside, they could see other teams still working frantically. Some students had not moved from their positions in 12 hours. Okay, Hannah said. We slept. Now what? Nari had an idea. She pulled out actual paper and pens from her desk drawer. Several of the others stared at her like she had grown a second head. Paper? Yoonji said. You want us to use paper? Why not? Nari said. Everyone else is using the most advanced technology available. Maybe we should try the opposite. She spread the paper across the table and began to sketch the problem by hand. Her drawing was not as precise as the holographic projections, but something about it felt different. More real. Somehow Hyun watched her work and suddenly started nodding. Yes, he said. Yes, that is it. That is what? Yuna asked. Look at how Nari is drawing it, Hyun said. She is not trying to copy the pattern exactly. She is interpreting it. She is making it into something she can understand. Taeyang picked up another pen and started drawing his own version. It looked different from Nari's, but it was clearly the same basic pattern. Everyone sees this problem differently, he said. The Vrin see it as data. The Thrain see it as equations. But maybe we can see it as something else. Like what? Minji asked. Like a map, Somin said suddenly. She had been quiet until now, but her eyes were bright with excitement. Not a map of space, but a map of meaning. A map of something that mattered to the people who made it. Ji-woo felt something click in his mind. The ancient builders, he said. We need to know more about them. Somin was already pulling up historical records on her datapad. There's not much information, she said. They disappeared thousands of years ago. We do not even know what they looked like. But we know they existed, Junho said. We know they were smart enough to create this problem. What else do we know? They spent the next several hours researching. Not researching the problem itself, but researching the civilization that had created it. Where they had lived. What ruins they had left behind. What their art looked like. What their cities had been built like. Professor Mekton stopped by again in the evening. He looked at their table covered in paper drawings and historical records with obvious confusion. What are you doing? He asked, his mandibles clicking rapidly. Which meant he was puzzled. Research, Minji said. But you are not working on the problem, the professor said. Yes, we are, Hyun replied calmly. The professor looked at them for a long moment, then left without another word. Through the windows, they could see him join a group of other professors who were observing the trials. They were all talking and looking at the human lab with expressions that clearly said these students have no idea what they are doing. Maybe we do not, Ji-woo thought. But maybe that is okay. By hour 30, most teams were showing signs of strain. The Vrin, who had been working non-stop, were making calculation errors. Their four-lobed brains were incredible, but even they had limits. The Asiri collective had split into factions, different groups of telepaths disagreeing about the approach. Only the Thrains still looked confident, though even they were starting to show frustration. The humans took another break. They ate a proper meal together in the cafeteria. They talked about things that had nothing to do with the problem. They even laughed. Other students stared at them. How could they be laughing? Did they not understand how important this was? Did they not care that they were going to fail? But when they returned to their lab, something had changed. Yoonji, who had been studying ancient Earth psychology in her free time, made a connection that nobody else had seen. What if the problem is not about finding the right answer? She said. Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked at her. What do you mean? Jiwoo asked. Every species that has tried to solve this has approached it the same way, Yoonji explained. They try to find the optimal solution, the most efficient path, the mathematically perfect answer. But what if the ancient builders did not think that way? I do not understand, Nari said. Yoonji started drawing on the paper. Humans do things that are not efficient all the time. We take long routes because we like the scenery. We choose harder paths because they mean something to us. We make decisions based on feelings, not just logic. Tyann was nodding. Like when people visit grave sites of people they loved, even though the person is not there anymore. It is not logical, but it matters. Exactly, Yoonji said. What if this problem was made by beings who valued something other than efficiency? Hyan was staring at the pattern with new eyes. What if it is not asking us to find the fastest route, but the most meaningful one? Jiwoo felt his heart start to beat faster. What would be meaningful to the ancient builders? Somin pulled up her historical research. Look at this, she said. The ancient builders had 3 major cultural sites that we know of. A temple complex on the 4th planet of their home system, a memorial station at the edge of their territory, and a library ship that traveled between stars. Junho traced a path on the map. If you were going to visit all 3 sites, the efficient route would be temple, library, memorial. But what if you wanted to go in order of importance to you? Or in chronological order, Minji added. Birth, life, death, temple, library, memorial. Or the reverse, Yuna said. Memorial to temple, honoring the past before looking to the future. They were all talking at once now, ideas bouncing between them like electricity. For the first time since the trials began, they felt like they were onto something real. Nar kept drawing, her hands moving faster now. Each drawing showed a different interpretation of the path. Not the calculated path, but the human path. The path that might not make logical sense, but made emotional sense. Outside their lab, the galaxy's best and brightest students were calculating, computing, optimizing. They were using tools and abilities that humans could never match. But inside the small human lab, 12 students from Earth were doing something different. They were not trying to outcalculate anyone. They were trying to understand, to empathize, to feel what the ancient builders might have felt. And slowly, piece by piece, the problem was starting to make sense. By hour 48, the academy was in chaos. What had started as an organized academic challenge had become something much more intense. Students who had been confident at the beginning now looked exhausted and desperate. Some teams had already given up. The Vrin team had hit a wall. After running 17 million different calculations, every single path they tried led to the same impossible paradox. Their logic was perfect, their math was flawless, but something was fundamentally wrong. They sat in their lab, staring at screens filled with error messages, unable to understand where they had gone wrong. The Asiri collective had fractured. For a species that prided itself on perfect mental harmony, this was devastating. Half of the group believed the problem required pure, logical analysis. The other half insisted it needed intuitive understanding. They could not agree, and without agreement, Their telepathic abilities were useless. They sat in separate corners of their lab, not even looking at each other. Only 3 teams were still actively working. The Thrain, whose mathematical abilities were unmatched in the known galaxy. The Kalathi, a warrior species known for strategic thinking. And the humans. Throughout the academy, professors watched the observation feeds with growing concern. Chancellor Praxva had already prepared a statement. The proving trials were going to be a disaster this year. The failure rate would be the highest in Academy history. She had even started drafting changes to the curriculum. Ways to make the trials easier for future students. In the faculty lounge. Professor Macton sat with other instructors, watching the human team on the monitors. "I do not understand what they are doing," said Professor Thane, a crystalline being who taught advanced mathematics. "They are not even using computational models. They appear to be drawing pictures," another professor observed. "On paper, with their hands." "Primitive," someone muttered. But Professor Macton was not so sure. He had been watching the humans carefully. There was something in the way they worked together, something different from every other species he had taught. They argued, yes, but productively. They took breaks, which seemed wasteful, but came back with fresh insights. They approached the problem from angles that made no logical sense, yet somehow they were still in the competition. In the human lab, Jiwoo was having a breakthrough. He had been staring at Nari's drawings for the past hour, and suddenly something became clear. "It is not about the destination," he said out loud. Everyone looked up at him. "What?" Hannah asked. "The problem. It is not asking us to find the best way to get from point A to point B. It is asking us to understand why someone would make this specific journey." Taeyang frowned. "I do not see the difference." "Okay," Jiwoo said, standing up and starting to pace. This was how he thought best, moving around. Imagine you want to visit your grandmother. The logical route is to take the fastest transport directly to her house. But what if you also stop at a market to buy her favorite flowers? That is not efficient. It adds time. But it matters. Because it shows you care, Minji said, understanding dawning on her face. Exactly, Jiwoo said. Now imagine your grandmother passed away years ago, but you still visit the places that were important to her. The market where she shopped. The park where she walked. The temple where she prayed. The route does not make sense to someone just looking at efficiency, but it makes perfect sense to someone who understands the emotional context. Soman pulled up the historical data on the ancient builders again. Look at the timeline of their civilization, she said. They flourished for 2,000 years, then vanished suddenly. We do not know why. What if this problem was created at the end? Yoonji suggested. What if it was not a navigation problem at all, but a memorial? A way to remember their culture? Hyun was nodding rapidly now, his eyes bright with excitement. A pilgrimage route. Not the practical route, but the meaningful one. The route that would take you through the most important moments of their civilization's history. Junho started mapping it out. If we assume the route is chronological, following their culture from beginning to end, then the first stop would be their homeworld, Yuna said, where they originated. Then the colony worlds, in order of settlement, Nari added. Then the Great Library, where they stored their knowledge, Do-hyun said. Then the memorial sites, where they honored their dead, Minji continued. And finally, Jiwoo said softly, the last place they ever built. The place where their civilization ended. They all fell silent. It was just a theory, but it felt right in a way that pure calculations never had. How do we test it? Hana asked. Hyun was already working on his datapad, plugging in the new framework. Instead of trying to optimize for speed or efficiency, he was optimizing for cultural significance. Instead of treating each point as just a location, He was treating it as a chapter in a story. The numbers started to align. The paradoxes that had stumped the Vrin began to make sense when viewed through this new lens. The impossible contradictions became beautiful symmetries. "It is working," Hyan whispered. "It is actually working." They worked through the night, while the Thrain team grew more and more frustrated with their mathematical approach. And while the Kalathi warriors argued over strategic priorities, the humans followed the emotional logic of a long-dead civilization. Soman found historical records of ancient builder art. Yunji analyzed their poetry and songs, translated by earlier scholars. Taiyang studied the layout of their cities, looking for patterns in how they organized their sacred spaces. Every piece of information added to their understanding. The ancient builders valued continuity over innovation. They honored their ancestors more than they planned for their future. They believed in circular time rather than linear progress. They were not trying to go somewhere new. They were trying to remember where they had been docked by hour 60. The humans had a complete theory. By hour 66, they had tested it against every known data point. By hour 70, they were certain. Professor Mekton came by one last time before the final presentations. The humans were not working frantically like the other remaining teams. They were sitting together, talking quietly, reviewing their solution one last time. "How are you feeling?" the professor asked. "Good," Jiwoo said, and he meant it. The professor's mandibles clicked in surprise. "You believe you have solved it." "We believe we understand it," Hana corrected. "That is not quite the same thing." Outside the human lab, news was spreading. The Thrain team, the favorite to win, had achieved 94.7% completion. It was an incredible achievement, the highest score in 50 years. They were celebrating, confident in their victory. The Kalathi had reached 96.2%. Even better, they were certain no one could beat them. But in the small human lab, 12 students from a young species had something different. Not a percentage, not a calculation, but an understanding. They had not just solved the problem. They had felt it. They had connected with the beings who had created it across 4,000 years of silence. Tomorrow, they would present their solution. Tomorrow, the galaxy would see what humans could do when they stopped trying to compete on everyone else's terms and started playing to their own strengths. Tonight, they slept well, dreaming of ancient civilizations and meaningful journeys and the strange beauty of understanding something that everyone else had missed. The presentation hall was packed with more beings than Jiwoo had ever seen in one place. Every seat was filled. Students stood in the aisles. Faculty members lined the walls. Even the chancellor herself had come to watch, something she rarely did for student presentations. The air hummed with excitement and curiosity. Word had spread about the Thrain team's incredible score, 94.7%. In the 3,000-year history of the proving trials, only a handful of teams had ever scored above 90%. Most experts agreed that complete solution was impossible. The problem was designed to have no perfect answer. The Kalathi team would present first, then the Thrain, and finally the humans. It was meant to be an act of kindness, letting the humans watch the successful presentations before they showed their own work. Most professors assumed the humans would score perhaps 30 or 40%. Respectable for a first attempt from such a young species. Jiwoo sat with his team in the back of the hall, his heart beating fast. Hannah was practicing deep breathing exercises. Taiyang kept reviewing their notes, even though they all had the presentation memorized. Nari's leg bounced nervously under her seat. The Kalathi team took the stage. They were impressive, wearing ceremonial armor that gleamed under the lights. Their leader, a warrior named Kethver, spoke with absolute confidence. "We approach this celestial path problem as a strategic challenge," Kethver announced. Every point on the path represents a tactical position. Every connection represents a line of supply or retreat. Using military optimization algorithms developed over 10,000 years of warfare, we identified the strategic solution. Their presentation was flawless. Holographic displays showed battle formations and supply lines. Complex diagrams illustrated their tactical thinking. When they revealed their final score, the hall erupted in applause. 96.2% completion. Keffer declared proudly. It was the highest score anyone had achieved in over a century. The Kalathi team bowed and left the stage to thunderous applause. Students were already whispering that they had won. How could anyone beat 96%? Next came the Thrain. If the Kalathi had been impressive, the Thrain were magnificent. Their presentation included mathematical proofs so elegant that several professors actually gasped. They had reduced the entire problem to a series of equations that flowed across the screens like poetry. Their team leader, a mathematician named Velkor, spoke in the calm, measured tones that Thrain were famous for. Mathematics is the universal language, Velkor said. It transcends culture, biology, and time. We've expressed the celestial path problem in pure mathematical terms, removing all ambiguity and subjective interpretation. Their visualizations were beautiful. Numbers danced and transformed, showing relationships that most beings could barely comprehend. When they revealed their score, even the Kalathi team looked impressed. 94.7% completion. Slightly lower than the Kalathi, but the complexity and elegance of their approach earned them equal applause. The two teams were now standing together at the side of the hall, already congratulating each other on their success. Then it was time for the humans. Jiwoo and Hana walked onto the stage together. They had decided to co-present, with the others supporting from the seats. As they took their positions, Jiwoo could hear whispers throughout the hall. The humans are presenting? This should be interesting. I wonder how badly they failed. At least they tried. The whispers were not mean-spirited, just realistic. Everyone knew humans were new to the academy. Everyone knew they did not have the natural advantages of other species. Everyone expected them to fail gracefully. Hannah stepped forward and began to speak. Her voice was steady, though Jiwoo knew she was terrified. "We want to start by telling you a story," Hana said in the audience. Several professors frowned. A story? This was a mathematical and navigational challenge. What did stories have to do with anything? But Hannah continued. 4,000 years ago, there was a civilization called the Ancient Builders. We do not know what they looked like. We do not know why they disappeared. But we know they created the celestial path problem. And we asked ourselves, why? Minji activated their first display. Instead of equations or tactical maps, it showed images of ancient builder ruins. Their temples, their homes, their art. Every other team tried to solve this problem through calculation, Jiwoo said. And they did incredible work. 96% completion is amazing. But we realized something. What if the problem was not meant to be calculated? What if it was meant to be understood? Now they had the room's attention. Even the Thrain were listening carefully. Yoonji stood up from her seat to explain their research. We studied the ancient builder culture. Their values, their beliefs, their way of seeing the universe. We discovered that they did not value efficiency the way most modern civilizations do. They valued meaning, memory, connection to the past. Soman showed historical timelines, cultural analysis, artistic interpretations. Everything the humans had learned about the civilization and had created the problem. The celestial path is not a navigation problem, Yuna said from her seat. It is a pilgrimage route. The word hung in the air. Pilgrimage. Several beings in the audience looked confused. Others looked thoughtful. Jiwoo brought up their solution. If you try to optimize this path for speed or efficiency, you get paradoxes. That is what everyone has discovered. But if you optimize for cultural significance, for emotional meaning, for the journey that would matter most to someone honoring their civilization's history, then the numbers appeared on the screen. Clean, simple, perfect. 100% completion, Hana said quietly. For a moment, there was absolute silence in the hall. Then chaos erupted. Impossible! Someone shouted. Check their calculations. Another voice called. There must be an error. Professor Mekton stood up. His mandibles were clicking so fast they made a rattling sound. Please, he said loudly. Please, quiet. The hall settled, but barely. Everyone was staring at the humans on stage. Professor Mekton walked to a terminal and began reviewing the human solution. His four eyes moved independently, checking different parts of the calculations simultaneously. Other professors joined him, their faces showing disbelief. The verification took 10 minutes. 10 long minutes during which the humans stood on stage, trying to look calm, while the entire academy held its breath. Finally, Professor Mekton turned to face the audience. His voice was shaking slightly when he spoke. The solution is correct, he said. The humans have achieved 100% completion. The hall exploded. Students were shouting. Professors were arguing. The Thrain team looked stunned. The Kalathi warriors stood frozen in shock. Headmaster Vekthar rose from his seat. His four eyes focused on the humans with an expression no one could quite read. In 3,000 years, he said, and his voice carried over the noise, silencing everyone. In 3,000 years of the proving trials, no team has ever achieved perfect completion. We believed it was impossible. He walked slowly toward the stage, his age-old frame moving with deliberate care. The Vryn tried with processing power. The Asiri tried with telepathy. The Thrain tried with mathematics. The Kalathi tried with strategy. All achieved impressive results. But only the humans asked a different question. He reached the stage and looked at Jiwoo and Hana directly. You did not ask, how do we solve this? You asked, why does this exist? You did not try to be faster or smarter. You tried to understand, to empathize, to connect with beings who lived and died thousands of years before you were born. Yuna stood up from her seat and spoke clearly. We are not the strongest species. We are not the smartest. We do not have the best technology or the most advanced abilities. But we are human. And maybe, sometimes, that is enough. The hall was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of disbelief, but the silence of understanding. Somewhere in the back of the hall, one being started clapping. Then another. Then more. Within seconds, the entire academy was applauding. Not polite academic applause, but genuine, thunderous recognition. The humans stood together on the stage, 12 ordinary people from a young planet, and accepted the praise of a galaxy that had just learned something important about what it meant to be human. 3 weeks after the proving trials, the Galactic Academy looked the same but felt completely different. The buildings were still the same towering structures of crystal and metal. The classes still followed the same rigorous schedule. But something fundamental had shifted. Jiwoo walked through the main campus and noticed the changes everywhere. Students from different species sat together in the gardens, not just with their own kind, but in mixed groups. In the library, a Vryn student was asking a human for help with a cultural analysis assignment. In the cafeteria, Thrain and humans shared tables, discussing approaches to problems that combined mathematics with emotional context. The biggest change had come from the academy administration itself. Within a week of the human victory, Chancellor Prexva had announced a complete restructuring of the curriculum. New courses appeared in the catalog almost overnight. Emotional logic and cultural context, was now a required class for all first-year students. Narrative problem-solving had replaced one of the advanced calculation courses. Cross-species collaboration techniques was being offered for the first time in Academy history, but even more significant was what happened informally. Alien students who had once barely noticed, the humans now actively sought them out. Doyan found himself tutoring a Vrin student named Kexla in what the aliens were calling soft analysis. They sat together in the study commons, working through a physics problem. "I do not understand," Kexla said, her four-lobed brain processing information faster than any human could track. "I can calculate the trajectory perfectly, but the assignment asked me to explain why the civilization would choose this specific orbit for their station." "That is not a calculation question." "No," Dalian agreed. "It is a why question, not a how question. You have to think about what they valued. Was safety more important than efficiency? Did they care about having a good view of their homeworld? Were they trying to make a symbolic statement?" Kexla's eyes widened. "All four of them, independently. I never considered that engineering decisions could be based on feelings." "Everything is based on feelings," Dohyun said with a smile. "We just do not always admit it." Across the campus, Soman was working with an Asiri collective on a group project. The Asiri had been struggling since their telepathic consensus broke down during the proving trials. They had requested human help to learn new ways of collaborating. "When you disagree with each other, how do you decide what to do?" one of the Asiri asked. Her name was impossible for humans to pronounce, so Soman called her Silver, based on the color of her telepathic aura. "We talk about it," Soman said. "We listen to different perspectives. We vote sometimes. Or we compromise, finding a solution that gives everyone part of what they want." "But you do not share thoughts directly," Silver said. "How can you understand each other without telepathy?" "We try really hard," Soman admitted. "And we fail sometimes. But that is okay. Failure is part of learning." The Asiri collective fell silent, processing this concept. For a telepathic species that valued perfect harmony, the idea that disagreement and failure could be productive was revolutionary. In the engineering labs, Junho had become an unlikely celebrity. His approach to productive irrationality, as he called it, had attracted attention from species across the galaxy. He was teaching a workshop on creative problem-solving to a packed audience. "The key is to temporarily ignore what you know is impossible," Junho explained to a room full of students from a dozen different species. "Humans are very good at believing in impossible things. We dream. We imagine. We ask, what if, even when all evidence says no." A Thrain student raised a mathematical appendage. "But that is inefficient. Why waste time on impossible solutions?" "Because sometimes," Junho said, "what seems impossible is just difficult. And sometimes the impossible solution leads you to a possible one you never would have considered. We call it thinking outside the box." "What box?" the Thrain asked, genuinely confused. Junho laughed. "Exactly. The human dormitory had become one of the most popular places on campus. Students from other species would stop by to study, to talk, to learn. Nari had started a weekly art session where beings from different cultures would draw or paint together, sharing not techniques but perspectives. Yunji was running discussion groups about psychology and culture. Taiyang was teaching meditation techniques. Minji had started a cooking club where students from different worlds shared their food and the stories behind their favorite meals. Even Professor Mekton had changed. He started every class now by asking not just what is the answer, but why does this question matter? His students, who had initially been confused by this approach, were now achieving higher scores than ever before. Understanding the purpose behind a problem made solving it easier. One evening, Jiwoo sat in the observation dome with Hana and Yuna, looking out at the stars. They had been summoned to a meeting with Headmaster Vecthar the next morning, and none of them knew why. "Do you think we did something wrong?" Hannah asked nervously. "We solved an impossible problem," Eunice said. "How could that be wrong?" "Maybe they want to study us," Jiwoo suggested. "Figure out how human brains work." They laughed, but there was a nervousness to it. Being the center of attention was exhausting. The next morning, all 12 humans met in the headmaster's office. It was a vast room filled with artifacts from thousands of worlds and cultures. Headmaster Vecthar sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of crystallized starlight. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to chairs that adjusted themselves to each person's physiology. They sat, waiting nervously. "I want to thank you," the headmaster said. "In my 400 years at this academy, I have never seen such a profound shift in how we approach education." "We just solved the problem," Heinz said quietly. "No," the headmaster corrected gently. "You changed how we think about problems. The proving trials were designed to test the limits of intelligence, to push students to the edge of their abilities. But you showed us that intelligence comes in many forms. Processing power is not the same as wisdom. Speed is not the same as understanding." He stood and walked to a window that overlooked the campus. "Every species in the galaxy has contributed something unique to our collective knowledge," he continued. "The Vryn gave us computation. The Asiri gave us telepathy. The Thrain gave us mathematics. The Kalathi gave us strategy. And now humans have given us empathy. The ability to understand not just what beings do, but why they do it." "It is not just humans who have empathy," Minji said carefully. "Of course not," the headmaster agreed. "But humans have made it central to how you solve problems. You do not see it as a weakness or a distraction from logic. You see it as a tool, as valid as any equation or calculation." He turned back to face them, his 4 eyes moving independently to look at each student. "The galaxy is changing," he said. "Slowly, but inevitably. And you 12, whether you intended to or not, have become ambassadors for a new way of thinking. Other species are watching Earth now. They are curious about humanity in a way they were not before." "That is a lot of pressure," Nari said. "It is," the headmaster acknowledged. "But you do not have to carry it alone. That is another thing you have taught us. Humans work together. You share burdens. You support each other. These are not new concepts to the galaxy, but you have reminded us of their importance." As they left the headmaster's office, the humans were quiet, processing what they had heard. They walked across campus together, as they always did, a small group of beings from a young planet that had somehow changed an ancient institution. In the cafeteria that evening, Jiwoo sat with a mixed group. Hana was explaining Earth history to a curious Vryn. Taeyang was debating philosophy with a Thrain. Someone was teaching an Asiri how to tell jokes. Around them, dozens of similar groups filled the space. Different species learning from each other in ways that had not happened before the proving trials. A young student, newly arrived at the academy, approached their table nervously. She was from a species Jiwoo did not recognize, with scales that shifted colors with her emotions. "Excuse me," she said in hesitant galactic standard. "Are you the humans who solved the celestial path problem?" "We are," Jiwoo confirmed. "I just wanted to say thank you," the student said, her scales turning a warm orange that probably indicated gratitude. "I was so nervous about coming to the academy. My species is new to the coalition, like yours. Everyone is so much smarter, so much more advanced. But then I heard what you did. You showed that being different is not the same as being less. And now I am not so afraid." She hurried away before they could respond, but her words hung in the air. Yuna smiled. "I think that is the best review we could get." That night, Jiwoo stood again at the observation dome, looking out at the infinite stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, a small blue planet that had only recently joined the vast community of galactic civilization. A planet of beings who were not the fastest, not the strongest, not the smartest, but who had something valuable to offer anyway. He thought about the ancient builders, the long-dead civilization whose problem had changed everything. They had created a test that lasted 4